Moscow's latest attempt. The Russian Federation seeks to return to the international negotiating table.
The Kremlin is trying to package its demands as an addition to the peace plan. The only question is whether there will be anything about real peace, or just the same old ultimatum with a new title.
3 hours without GPS. Russia staged a digital provocation against the British Defense Minister's plane.
The incident occurred after Healy's visit to Estonia. At one point, the plane literally went blind, GPS vanished, smartphones and laptops lost connection, and the pilots had to switch to backup navigation.
A new threat to Kyiv. The Russian Federation is threatening systematic strikes.
The Russian Foreign Ministry announced the start of systematic attacks on the Ukrainian military-industrial complex. Lavrov's department claims that the targets will be not only enterprises, but also so-called decision-making centers.
The end of the Great War. The US and Iran are one step away from signing a historic agreement.
Erdogan, Trump, and Middle Eastern leaders held emergency talks behind closed doors. The fate of the Strait of Hormuz is decided, and Erdogan declares the end of the nuclear threat.
The highway near Mariupol is ablaze. Azov showed how they are cutting off the occupiers' logistics. No longer a Russian city, Solovyov threw a tantrum and suddenly gave up on Odessa.
Odessa will return. It will return.
But why?
You should ask Maria Zakharova.
Ask Maria Zakharova why Odessa should return?
Because it's a Russian city.
What Odessa?
A Russian city.
Because it's a city of Russian culture. Are there any Russians left in it?
There are?
Seriously? Where did you find them there?
Access as a reward. In Russia, they've come up with metered internet.
It seems that it could be served in portions for good behavior, for example. That is, one must learn how to use the internet. One must, so to speak, grow into it. It must be earned.
These and other topics right now. Hi, I'm Volodymyr Rabchin, and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe and hit the like button. Moving on to the news. The fact that we have internet, the Syzran refinery halted operations after successful Ukrainian attacks, and the defense forces launched a series of new strikes on key enemy targets. This was reported by the General Staff. In particular, hits were recorded at a command post, as well as a warehouse and a UAV control point of the occupiers in the temporarily occupied territories of Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia. The destruction of a radar station in the Luhansk region has been confirmed. A railway tanker with fuel and lubricants was attacked in the Donetsk region. Equipment and tanks at the Yaroslav linear production and dispatch station were also damaged. Ukraine is responding to massive Russian shelling and the killing of civilians. Russians now have a great opportunity to compare the war on TV with the war outside their windows.
Instead of Kyiv, Russia should prepare for an explosive morning in the swamplands.
There's a launch from over there. Everything is flying from that direction.
Energy infrastructure and the railway are in the crosshairs. Even a high concentration of air defenses doesn't save Russian strategic sites. Ukrainian long-range strikes have become more destructive and regular.
If we're talking about our enemy, they have a systematic approach to terrorizing Ukraine and the genocide of Ukrainians. If we're talking about the work of Ukraine's defense forces, it's a systematic effort to destroy the enemy's military, industrial production and industrial potential, their logistics, command staff, personnel, and so on. That is the potential to continue the war against Ukraine.
Ukrainian drone attacks have paralyzed or significantly limited the operation of many large oil refineries in central and southern Russia. Since the beginning of May 2024 alone, about 11 oil refineries have been hit. Some attacks in May reached record distances of over 1,500 kilometers from the front line, where several Russian aircraft were destroyed and damaged.
Ukraine, in turn, has achieved significant results, undermining the oil refining industry like never before. Over the entire period of strikes on Russian oil refineries, we can say that about 50% of the oil refining industry in the European part of the Russian Federation has lost its potential. In addition, Ukraine is striking the middle and deep rear zones of the Russian Federation, targeting military-industrial complex enterprises, airfields, military facilities, and other businesses. Again, Kremny L, the Votkinsk plant. Precision strikes at the middle strike level are being carried out on the locations of Russian officers, of certain elite units.
And also, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces have begun to mass eliminate air defense assets. This creates air corridors for long-range drones to break through into central regions of Russia.
The Russian Federation is focusing exclusively on killing and destroying the civilian component of our country, that is, on the genocide of the civilian population. This applies to energy infrastructure, it applies to civilian logistics hubs, and it applies to simply terrorizing the civilian population, killing ordinary Ukrainians in the deep rear through shelling and strikes on residential complexes and buildings. That's the difference. We are doing everything for the sake of victory and accordingly undermining the potential of the Russian occupation forces.
Thanks to the rapid development of Ukrainian technologies and the expansion of the geography of attacks, the entire European part of the Russian Federation is under constant fire threat.
We started in 2022 with the ability to strike deep into the territory of the Russian Federation from temporarily occupied territories up to 50 kilometers, specifically at such distances. Today, our drones fly more than 2,000 kilometers and missiles can fly up to 3,000 kilometers deep into the territory of the Russian Federation. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of 2026, we see yet another record for flight range and strikes. And in 2027, it will be again over 3,000 kilometers with strike drones alone.
In 4 years, Kyiv has increased weapons production 35 times, switching to high-tech models. Some of the key developments include Flamingo cruise missiles, the ROM-2 system, anti-ship Neptune missiles, and drones.
We quite quickly, in extremely tight deadlines, actually implemented a whole range of projects related not only to the further modernization of existing missile types of missile weaponry. For example, the R-360 Neptune missiles, which have been modernized throughout all these years. And as of today, we have the Neptune D, a missile with an increased range of up to 1,000 kilometers. But also new models were created, among which the most famous are, of course, 5.5, that's Flamingo.
The Ukrainian defense industry has made a real technological leap, transforming from an outdated Soviet base into one of the most innovative defense sectors in the world. While the Kremlin is forced to beg for shells from North Korea and drones from Iran, Ukraine is scaling up its missile program of retribution.
In Ukraine, projects related to missile weaponry are developing quite rapidly. First of all, it should be noted that in any other country, missile weaponry and the classic creation of missile weaponry in general are rather long-term projects. These are long-term construction projects. They aren't done in months or even in a few years. Therefore, in Ukraine, at truly extremely accelerated, forced, I would say, paces, both the creation of subsonic cruise missiles is developing, and we are approaching our own stably produced ballistics.
The war has become a powerful catalyst for the development of the Ukrainian defense industry. Thanks to private companies, Ukraine will be able to create defense innovations and effectively implement them on the battlefield.
At the Kaliningrad airport, the carpet plan was introduced for the first time, a ban on takeoffs and landings. It is currently not known for certain whether Ukrainian drones were involved in this. The information is being clarified. Let me remind you, we are talking about a city located outside the main territory of Russia. Every fourth Oreshnik likely malfunctions and crashes during launch. This is reported by the Institute for the Study of War. According to OSINT analysts, during the massive shelling of Ukraine on the night of May 23rd to 24th, the occupiers could have launched 2 Oreshniks. However, Putin's newest superweapon malfunctioned and fell in the territory of the temporarily occupied Donetsk region, about 40 kilometers from the front line. If this data is finally confirmed, it will indicate catastrophic statistics for the Russian defense industry. And the Oreshnik strike on Bila Tserkva also backfires on the invaders. Did the Russians really want to hit a garage cooperative, or were they aiming for Kyiv but missed? 80 kilometers this way, 80 kilometers that way. Details in the report.
The Kremlin's failure. Russia launched an Oreshnik medium-range ballistic missile to strike Ukraine.
Putin launched his Oreshnik against Bila Tserkva. They're truly unhinged? It's important that this doesn't go without consequences for Russia.
The Oreshnik was launched from the Kapustin Yar range in Russia's Astrakhan region, but it landed in the Kyiv region. This information was confirmed by the head of the communications department of the Ukrainian Air Force Command. Footage posted online captured the moment of impact with the separation of warheads accompanied by a series of explosions.
The Oreshnik actually hit a garage cooperative in Bila Tserkva, and it was in a completely different part of the city from the airfield. Some retaliatory strike, that is.
The remains of the missile were collected and sent for forensic examination. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed the use of the Oreshnik missile. They added that the strike's objectives were achieved and all designated targets were hit.
Did you like the picture? Pretty, isn't it? There aren't even any craters. Just incredibly expensive metal into the ground for a pretty picture that no one but retirees believes in anymore.
Their indignation is quite understandable since the cost of one such missile,
Using missiles that cost somewhere between $50 and $80 million each just to destroy 3, yes, only 3 garages. Well, honestly, it really just doesn't seem like a very serious or well thought out action at all, does it?
this amount equals hundreds of annual budgets for Kapustin Yar, where the Oreshniks are launched from. Meanwhile, Kapustin Yar itself continues to fall into decay. There are 3 theories about what the Russians were trying to hit this time. The first is absurd, but it's a possibility.
There was a workshop for producing FPV drones, which fly over Russia and cause the Russians a lot of trouble.
Some propagandists claim that an airfield or a defunct power plant was nearby.
Well, even if we assume there was a military airfield in Bilatserkva, which hasn't operated for a long time and hasn't seen any flights for ages, well, let's say they wanted to destroy some buildings there. Well, maybe the buildings could have been destroyed. Everything else, when you really think about it, from the impact of a 1.5 meter warhead mock-up, just to be clear, that's a mock-up of a warhead that's 1.5 meters long, plus a 1.5 ton mock-up, which is then divided into 36 separate elements. It just seems like, well, honestly, not the most rational or logical approach to take in this situation.
Also, another theory could be that the guidance system failed.
A strike on Kyiv was planned, targeting the decision-making center, but they missed by 90 to 100 kilometers.
But it's possible this was a conspiracy against the dictator Putin, and the strike was intentionally aimed elsewhere.
The people who planned this operation, they deliberately steered the missiles away from
their true targets to, well, sort of shift the whole picture so that as a result, Russia couldn't cause significant damage to Ukraine. Here too, there was no strike on the targets. It was a massive, probably the strongest ballistic strike in the entire history of the city of Kyiv. But the result, yes, we have casualties, yes, we have injured, yes, many different facilities have been destroyed. But with such a ballistic strike, there should have been, well, more serious destruction of significant targets.
This is already the 3rd use of this weapon by the criminal Kremlin regime against Ukraine in less than a year.
The strike on Dnipro, there was info about damage to a boiler house, but the territory of Yuzmash itself is 440 hectares, I think. Hitting such a territory, well, it's kind of more or less possible. With what accuracy, that's another question.
In January of 2026, Russia launched an Oreshnik at Lviv.
Somewhere a bit closer to the center, in order to deliver some truly serious strikes and show the Europeans, look, this is what will happen to you when we hit you with Oreshnik. But it, I think, also failed to reach its target.
This is a Russian tool of terror. It's unlikely a missile, whose main purpose is delivering a nuclear payload, will have a high level of accuracy. The Kremlin mothballed production of Yars, or as Putin likes to call it, Oreshnik, back in 2018.
The first launch took place in 2012.
Experts believe that the Russians, after the launch at Ukraine, might have at most 1 missile left.
It seems there was 1 unsuccessful missile launch, so most likely the Russians now have left, in the best case scenario for them, it's 1 or 2 missiles. And in the most likely scenario, they have run out of these missiles. So I don't really believe that the Russians resumed after 6 years. In 2024, they supposedly resumed production, or were going to, that after 6 years, it's realistic to resume production of such missiles at the Botkinsk machine building plant, which was also struck.
Moreover, it hasn't been proven that it was specifically Oreshnik brought to Belarus and not another missile.
What did they bring, according to the pictures? They didn't bring Oreshnik there, they brought some other sausage that looks nothing like Oreshnik. It's just like some piece of plywood, they slapped some contour together, did something, but Oreshnik is a much larger missile, 20 meters, and that one turned out to be about 12 meters.
Russian propaganda shouted loudly that Russia could ramp up production, though there's no official data on this, nor are there specialists in Russia who could fix the mistakes.
The concepts of the Russian approach aren't gradual improvements, but global leaps. And Russia is no longer capable of global, technological, scientific, or innovative leaps. Not at all. They have no innovative development. All their innovations are just the use of Soviet designs.
Another missile Putin boasts about is the Sarmat. It became one of the most high-profile failures of the Kremlin's nuclear deterrence program.
There was only one more or less decent successful launch of the Sarmat, and everything else was a failure. Once it even blew apart the silo, and they say there's a crater about 200 meters wide. It's hard for me to even imagine such a thing.
Well, you've probably seen these shots.
Order received. Yes, sir. Prepare for joint actions. Ready for joint actions.
But no one has been able to confirm the authenticity of the data reported to the bunker dictator. The use of Oreshnik, Sarmat, or other weapons is nothing more than a means of pressure. But in fact, these missiles haven't received proper attention or investment. It's no wonder observers often ironically call Oreshnik Putin's Wunderwaffe.
Ukraine has managed to stabilize the front. President Zelensky said this. According to him, it's especially pleasing when Ukrainian successes are confirmed by the whining of so-called Russian military bloggers. Furthermore, the president of Ukraine reported that our state is trying to speed up work in Europe on producing its own anti-ballistic systems. Over the past 24 hours, Russia has lost at least 1,010 invaders killed and wounded. Thus, since the start of the full-scale invasion, it's already 1,357,950 occupiers. Additionally, over the last 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 1 Russian tank, 7 armored combat vehicles, 64 artillery systems, and dozens of other pieces of Russian military equipment. It's high time to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it. Please do it right now. Thank you. And glory to Ukraine. In the Kremlin, they are increasingly talking about an approaching catastrophe. The Guardian writes about this. Sources for the publication claim that Putin still believes in capturing the Donetsk and Luhansk regions by the end of the year, although a significant part of his inner circle doubts this. At the same time, generals, as journalists write, may simply sugarcoat the situation at the front because the system in Russia works on the principle only good news is reported to the leadership.
There is profound disappointment in him. Under this headline, a new article was published by The Guardian, which talks about support for Putin in Russia. According to the article's sources, the Russian president, increasingly isolated, is determined to continue the war in Ukraine despite a weakened economy.
Most of the population, and of course most of the elites, understand that the kind of victory Putin wants to achieve is impossible.
The population is very tired of the war, the elites are tired of Europe's sanctions and want to return to the old days. All this together creates a critical mass of dissatisfied people who would like the war to end as soon as possible on any terms.
At the same time, the Russian elite does not believe in Putin's victory or even in the complete capture of Donbas. This year, which has been fatal for the Russian economy, has forced Putin's supporters to reconsider their attitude toward him.
Whether it's a revolution or a palace coup, it's actually people's fear of imprisonment, if not for their own lives, because we know how many people have died suddenly, including among the elites. Therefore, if this fear were less, I think a palace coup would have happened a long time ago. But for now, fear holds it all back, and we can't say for sure when the fear will lessen, when the fear for their lives and their future will become such that they decide on a palace coup.
The sugarcoating of events at the front has been shattered by the realities of life in modern Moscow, where the war has returned. Just a few years ago in Russia, people were afraid to say a cross word against Putin. Now opinion leaders are recording entire appeals to him.
How much is enough? How much money do you have to steal for it to be enough? I, of course, sincerely hope that our president is really not aware, and as Vika says, everything is brought to him in a folder and he doesn't know what's happening to the people. I sincerely want to believe that, but I just don't understand how a situation could occur where 1% of the people have what 99% don't. Basic needs, basic ones. The most basic needs are simply not being met.
Propagandist war correspondents themselves admit the superiority of the armed forces of Ukraine at the front.
In the West Zaporizhzhia direction, the situation continues to worsen for the Russian side. The enemy is consistently pushing through the defenses of Russian units, which had been on the offensive here since last year. At this point, the Russian side risks losing all the progress made in advancing towards Zaporizhzhia. A significant role is played by the superiority of Ukrainian formations in drones and trained operators in this sector.
Internet outages, drones flying overhead, and the failure to meet minimal needs are bringing even ordinary Russians out into the streets.
We are sending this collective appeal to the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, we, the residents of the Beryozovi micro-district of the Markovsky municipality in the Irkutsk region, have repeatedly and regularly over the past 5 years appealed to you regarding the construction of a secondary school in our micro-district. If the Russian Federation cannot finish the school in our micro-district, we ask Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Viktorovich Lavrov, to appeal to the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, with a proposal to fund our school's construction as part of ethno-cultural diversity and the active development of cultural ties with China.
According to Russian statistics, 20% of Russians are ready to take to the streets for protests due to the falling standard of living. Another 14% are dissatisfied for political reasons and are also ready to call for changes in their country.
New old Russian threats. The Kremlin advises foreigners to leave Kyiv as soon as possible and residents of the capital not to approach military and administrative infrastructure sites. The Russian Federation announced possible strikes on decision-making centers. Ukraine's foreign ministry reacted to the scare stories from Moscow. Thus, Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha called them a mockery of peace efforts and urged not to give in to Russian blackmail. And Foreign Ministry spokesperson Georgy Tikhy published a post in which he pointed out the Kremlin's lack of logic and conducted a mock poll. I quote, "For 4 years and 3 months, Russia has been attacking Kyiv weekly with ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as swarms of drones, killing civilians and causing destruction. Today it is playing an absolutely new card, in quotes of course, by threatening to attack Kyiv." What does this mean? Alcoholism, despair, lack of creativity, all of the above? And what do you think? Share your opinion in the comments. Finally, about the Russian flash mob. Stand in a multi-hour queue for 20 liters of gasoline. Very popular lately. The Tver region is joining in. All the details are next.
Refueling a car in temporarily occupied Crimea has turned into a real quest on which you can spend a lot of time and money. There is no 95 in power, 92, 75, 95. On the Annexed Peninsula, there are disruptions in fuel supplies at many gas stations. There is no gasoline or diesel fuel. Queues of cars are being observed. The Russian authorities in Sevastopol have introduced restrictions on the sale of fuel, explaining the situation by logistical difficulties. Currently, there are certain logistical difficulties, the reasons for which are known. The government of Sevastopol and the leadership of the Republic of Crimea are doing everything possible to normalize the situation as soon as possible, to avoid a rush, to avoid a panic, just like last time. We're introducing a measure that has already proven its effectiveness. Fuel sales at the TS gas station network will be limited to 20 liters per vehicle or 1 canister until the situation has stabilized.
Gasoline shortages aren't just limited to the Annexed Peninsula. It's the same story across all of the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. What's more, shortages of 95 and 92 octane gasoline have begun in many regions of the Russian Federation. People are stocking up in the Tver region. There's no gas, only 100 octane and diesel fuel. For 5 minutes, only 92 was available. The pumps are closing down. There's a massive gas shortage in the Tver region. It's almost gone, and where it's left, the price has skyrocketed. The fuel crisis is slowly but surely spreading across central Russia. Russia's gasoline consumption is 100,000 tons. Currently in Russia, by various estimates, between 35 and 45,000 tons of gas are produced daily. We're talking about 92 and 95 octane, primarily 95 gasoline. This hasn't happened, mind you, since the fall of 2025. 8 out of the 10 largest gasoline producers are currently offline. I'll say it again, 8 out of the 10 largest refineries producing gasoline are currently at a standstill. Last night, the Ukrainian armed forces launched another drone strike on an oil refinery. This time, a plant in Yaroslavl was the one affected. A few days before that strike, drones attacked the Lukoil Nizhegorod Nefteorg Syntez refinery in Stovo in Russia's Nizhny Novgorod region. Ukrainian drones attacked this plant twice in the span of just 3 days. Refineries producing over 30% of Russia's gasoline and about 20% of its diesel fuel have come under fire from the Ukrainian military. These aren't just some strikes for a PR effect or for some kind of oil windfall. This is a strategic operation on the scale of the Battle of Kursk. What we're seeing right now, although very few people actually realize it, is that the government's main objective is to prevent a potential fuel panic in both Moscow and St. Petersburg, since these two cities are by far the largest and most significant consumers of gasoline. And what is happening right now, due to the ongoing loss of production capacity in the central regions of Russia, is in principle a problem that is essentially unsolvable. Beyond the domestic fuel shortage, Ukrainian drones continue to squeeze Russia's revenues from oil refining and the energy sector. Ukrainian strikes continue to significantly limit and restrict revenues for the Russian oil refining and energy industries. Even though the ongoing conflict in the Middle East has provided a short-term boost to the Russian budget, these pressures remain. On May 20th, according to a report published by Reuters, which cited unnamed official data as well as multiple sources familiar with the matter, it was revealed that nearly all of the major oil refineries located throughout central Russia have either suspended their operations entirely or have significantly reduced their fuel production. This development comes in the aftermath of a series of recent Ukrainian drone strikes targeting these facilities. The fuel shortage problem is virtually impossible to solve, and it will snowball in Russia, as systematic Ukrainian drone strikes on the aggressor's oil refineries will only increase. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Strength to the Ukrainian defenders. Glory to Ukraine! Subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share this video. And see you soon.